All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's have a touch, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead and have your notes out. We're going to continue on. I want to wrap up some of the elements that I was discussing in the discussion having to do with marriage and the Supreme Court and the United States Constitution and kind of where things are headed. And then we're going to continue on page 3 with the an interesting area, very important area of the not of the Constitution, because it's not constitutional. This is code, the United States Code, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and laws with respect to disabilities. And then we'll get into criminal justice rights, and I'm going through here, and it's like, okay, wow, I got 90 minutes with you guys. That's awesome. Although my other 10th grade class I see tomorrow, I'll get 60 minutes with them because, yeah, we're going to be doing some more. No, wait a minute. No, wait. It's cool. It's cool. No, I got 90 minutes with them tomorrow, too. Yeah. Next week, though, we got a whole bunch of ISAT things and so forth, and I think that's where it gets a little bit, I think that's where it gets a little bit mixed up and so forth. Anyway, we continue on. You ready? Let's get back to, I want to focus on some issues having to do with marriage and some issues having to do with the Supreme Court and just society, okay? We saw last time that we were here together, did the United States Supreme Court agree that racial prevention from getting married was not okay? Yeah. So in 1967, after years of the African American community pushing for better presentation within society through Hollywood, through various different things, I would say Martin Luther King Jr. had a lot to do with it, because ultimately he won over a lot of support among the African American community, but also among people outside the African American community. I mean, he won a Nobel Peace Prize. Sometimes that's a pretty good indicator that what you're doing, peaceful demonstration and trying to kind of win people over and so forth, that was working, okay? So in one respect, that idea of we need to protect the community from having mixed race marriage and mixed race children and all that sort of stuff, that just sort of like, that was gone for the most part. It's a fringe belief, I would say, in the United States. It exists in other parts of the world, too. I mean, watch out, because you might show up in a part of the world and go, oh my gosh, wow, these ideas that the people of like mixing and so forth, and so it's like, whoa, sounds like America a long time ago. So they moved past that. But notice this is an issue, because I really want to focus on what's going on here, because it kind of tells you some of the dangers potentially that you have depending on which route you use. If you stick to this column and get politicians to change the point of view and to change the laws, fine, okay? And sometimes they will do it for one reason, sometimes they'll do it for another. But for here, this one's a little trickier. If you say the United States Supreme Court is going to be ruling on it, and they decide that they're going to, or they decide they're not going to, because if it's potentially a constitutional issue, they can do it. This goes back to the thing that I think I used with you guys before. Have you ever approached your parents asking them logically to follow a decision they had previously with another decision? I mean, it's like, well, you said we could do it this time, and then they're like, logically, I should also say yes in this situation. I mean, you guys have tried that. I mean, that's a typical, yeah, I mean, if you're a young person, you're trying to figure out your parents and figure out, like, to try and get things on a positive way and move forward and whatever, you try and size them up. You try and read them, okay? In fact, you consult with your siblings. That's why one of the reasons you have siblings. You consult with them and you come up with a plan. But how many of you guys, and this is the tricky part, how many of you guys have ever run into the situation where you're asking the parents to follow a logically consistent path and they don't? Okay? How many of you guys are going to be perfect parents and will never be inconsistent as far as that? You're like, depends on the day. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the day. So here's the deal. Do you want logical consistency with respect to the Supreme Court? Of course you do. And in fact, they have that. Write that down. That's called precedent. The Supreme Court, you expect them to follow one case, the logical precedent. And here we've already identified it. When you talk about individuals, they want to get married and spend the rest of their life, or at least until they get divorced, with another person. That's an individual choice. And what do you say to that individual person who wants to get married to another individual person when other people in the community say, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that? Who do you favor? The individual choice or the community majoritarian point of view? You guys are going with the individual choice. And that worked out for you pretty well on this one. And in fact, the other class pretty well did that, the same thing as far as the race. Okay, this one's pretty much over, at least on the marriage issue. Okay? When we got to sexual orientation, okay, we went through this fairly quickly, but understand, and I didn't give lots of examples, but you can write this down. There was a big movement among those who were proposing for, I don't remember it first came up, it was like gay rights. Basically, it's rights. Yeah, it's like, but you understand the thing. One of the key issues was on the marriage, and there's other ones and so forth too. Sexual orientation and so forth, not to have discrimination on that, and in particular with respect to the marriage. Okay? So one of the goals was to get a more positive presentation in society. So, for example, if you were to do what I did with the African American presentation in the history of Hollywood, earlier movies would portray people who are homosexual and so forth as being out of alignment with the community and odds and negative and so forth. Okay, do you understand that? So there would be a real effort in Hollywood to bring it to a much more positive. In fact, it's fascinating because if you look at modern television and so forth and movies, are homosexuals portrayed in a positive manner? And is it off scene or is it right there in front of you? It's right there in front of you. Yeah, it's fascinating because I remember I had a student do a Star Trek history IA, which was really fascinating. And the big thing was Captain Kirk, I think, kissing Uhura. He's a guy, she's a girl, he's white, she's black. It was a big thing in the 1960s. Well, I'm watching Star Trek Discovery. I don't know if you guys are into that or anything. Not Paramount, anyway. So they've got partners who are both male and so forth. And I'm looking at this as okay, so we can see that with respect to getting public opinion as far as sexual orientation and same-sex marriages being okay, has there been changes in public opinion? Easiest way to measure this. And this is why it was interesting to look at this as far as the timing of things. This happened pretty quickly. I told you this last time. Within the space of literally about 10 or 12 years, you went from no state allowing same-sex marriage to several, and the trend was moving in that direction. And here's the kicker. Guess which demographic age group was most okay with same-sex marriages, older or younger? Absolutely. You can put that down. Younger. It's which demographic group is likely to be around with us 30 years from now, the younger group or the older group? Why? Oh, are you giving me bad news as an older person? You should be careful. Some young people have issues that could get them into trouble. So, it's kind of as generations go through and new ideas become more popular, particularly among young people, then you can sort of see the trend going. Yes?
What's going on with North Dakota?
I think that was the only case, that was the only state that they didn't have a plaintiff in, maybe. I don't know. Banned, no challenge. I don't know. I didn't make the map. And this is from 2014. Yeah, I don't know. So when it finally came down to it, this is really critical, because as we go on to the next one, and we just started touching on the polygamous situation and so forth. When we get to that, we can see that the Supreme Court, some people say the Supreme Court moved too fast, that maybe they should have stayed away from the issue. Just to give you a sense, looking back, which of these politicians was okay with same-sex marriage? Ultimately, after they left office, Clinton, Barack Obama, I think there was a transition during his 8 years and so forth there. But even Donald Trump, after he came into office and so forth, well, I will just put it this way, as far as same-sex marriage, put this here. Did Donald Trump reverse the commander-in-chief decision by President Obama allowing people to be openly homosexual in the military? He did not. So in other words, here's the deal. On this one, guys, let me finish. On this one, it looks like the Supreme Court may have sort of said, okay, well, society is kind of moving along here, and even though, we might be a little bit ahead of society right now, we're catching the wave, and the wave is that there is greater acceptance of same-sex marriage and so forth in the country. Okay? Although, remember, it was only a 5-4 decision. Obergefell was a 5-4 decision. Make sure you have that. It would, I think if we had the court on there today, you might not have necessarily gotten the same decision. Okay? In fact, one of the justices asked this question. And it was a very interesting question during the oral argument. He asked the the attorneys for the plaintiffs, if we rule in your favor and say the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, covers you guys, and that states cannot interfere with your desire to get married to each other, then what are we to say to the next group that comes into court, and they want to throw out state laws limiting the number of people who want to get married to each other? Well, we're going to get into that one here in just a moment and see where you guys are, because it's kind of like in teaching students over a number of years, it's almost like I can sort of get a pulse of where things are going, where societal opinion is going. You guys said, let the Supreme Court decide on it, okay? And the basis of the decision, I think we only had one person in here saying, let's keep it to the elected officials and so forth. The basis of the decision is let the individual choice prevail. So even if there is a segment of a particular state that says, no, same-sex marriage is not really cool, or that is a separate thing, maybe just let the voters decide. Y'all were like, and the Supreme Court said, this is our issue. It's a constitutional issue. And we're being consistent. Individual choice. Well, what's going to happen now? Okay? We touched on it a little bit here, and I played you some of the segments. I'm not going to replay them. Put this down. Those people in American society that want there to be a right to have a marriage to more than one person at a time are pushing it. They're pushing the issue in a variety of ways. This is the social manner. It's on television. If you watched any of that and so forth, are they portrayed as terrible, awful, twisted people that we need to hide your children from? Not according to the way this is presented. I mean, it's a popular television on one of the TV stations and so forth. Okay? And so they're trying to make what they want to do more acceptable so that they can come into court and try and get a change and try and get the Supreme Court. And notice this. They want to go this route. This route takes too long. You guys already decided that. You didn't even want Virginia. You didn't want to give Virginia a chance to get rid of their racist laws. You guys didn't want to let the other states change to allow for same-sex marriage. So if the Supreme Court is open for business on marriage and the right to get married, the polygamous community is going to be trying to get the Supreme Court to take the case. And it's problematic. Because right now, how many states allow for a polygamous marriage? Zero. I haven't checked as far as public opinion, but let me just throw this out. Which group, older or younger, do you suppose is more opposed to polygamous marriage? I would say older. He's younger is like, whatever. You know? Whatevs. It's your own individual choice. So let's kind of spread this out a little bit. Now keep in mind, we do have a Supreme Court case on this, but you can like, oh, that's old. That's old. This occurred in the territory of Utah. Okay? These were early members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints before they had that critical change in policy of their faith, and it was allowed for and practiced. And these guys are like, we're going to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. They went to prison for it. Reynolds was married to 3 women, and he went to prison for it. And of course, he's making the argument, this is a religious belief system, freedom to exercise religion. And the court's like, no, the federal law is such that you can't do it. It is wrong, and people shouldn't do that. And it brings in all kinds of immorality, yada, 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 yada. Go ahead, Caden.
Are taxes easier for married people? I don't understand.
The taxes part. A general statement is, when you do your taxes and so forth, if you're married, you got a choice. If you're married, you can file as individuals or you can file as married. Because the government, in establishing different criteria as far as married, not married, they actually want to, you can put this down, the government likes to encourage marriage, primarily because the government wants to encourage kids to have parents, plural. Does that make sense? Because there's more hands on deck to provide all kinds of things, financial resources, love, care, attention, and so forth, all the kinds of things that your parents provide for you. Does that kind of make sense? So that's why there has been tax advantages typically for those who are married. And so then there's a question, can you be legally married?
Does it grow exponentially with the number of wives you have?
Okay, so here's the deal. You're getting ahead of yourself. Okay? You're getting ahead of yourself. Caden, right now, if you wanted to have multiple, you're like, I don't know, I'm thinking about getting married to this person and this person and this person. Bing! I'll ask them all. And I'll get married to them all. Wait a minute, but you're going to have to, Caden, you're going to have to get a state to change its law. All you need is one state to go change the law, and then you live in that state. Good luck trying to go to another state and saying, hey, full faith and credit, I want all of my marriages covered. Now notice right now, if you were a man coming from Kuwait that had 3 or 4 wives and came into the country with 3 or 4 wives, does the United States have to honor the 3 or 4 marriages that were created in the country of Kuwait? No. No! No! No, we're not talking about jail. Because here's what I want you to understand. Okay, let me back up to this one. This is important. Write this down. I want you to be very clear on this. Because in a way, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I have to bring this up before we've actually gotten into the right of privacy. Because the right of privacy is the last thing we're going to be covering in this unit. And it's a big one. That's the one that ultimately will have the abortion context. And it starts out with simply married couple being able to have access to birth control. But then it develops in the abortion cases, and it eventually develops into 2 cases. There was the Bowers versus Hardwick case, which said if a state wants to make illegal certain sexual behaviors that state was like, you shouldn't be doing that. I think I used the Lego analogy with you guys. I don't know if that worked.
It worked.
Good, because I hate having to get into details. That's not my area of expertise. That's health class, okay? So you can go into health class and ask, Mr. Holliday, Mr. Hanson was trying to talk about Legos and something. Could you elaborate? And you're like, ask him back, So anyway, but here's the deal. This one is actually kind of interesting because look at the Supreme Court in 1986. Look at this. This is actually kind of strategic here. In 1986, they said that so-called anti-sodomy laws were okay. Anti-sodomy, do we have to explain the Old Testament and the Bible to get a context of what is referred to as an anti-sodomy law? Do we need that? All right, here it is. In the Old Testament, one of the teachings is that certain sexual behaviors and so forth were not okay. There was a community called Sodom. And it was referred to as a lot of those Lego pieces going together in all kinds of different ways that they weren't supposed to. So what happened to Sodom? Bzzz. It got, removed. Okay? So when people say, what is an anti-sodomy law? State of Texas and other states and so forth had anti-sodomy laws. They're basically like laws that are in the books for that state that say you can't put the Lego pieces together in a variety of different ways. Do you follow? If they're really, really strict, they say that the only two people that can have that Lego relationship are married couples, so they would exclude it outside of a marriage, and only to that extent to which the Lego pieces coming together could achieve reproduction. Do you follow? Okay, anyway. But here's the deal. You're like, Mr. Hansen's talking about little children's toys. I'm lost. It's okay. I'm never going to see a Lego. No, you will. No, actually, you won't. You're going to be a parent someday, and you'll have Legos your kids will play with, and then all of a sudden at night when you're walking through the kitchen and so forth, you'll step on a Lego, and that will be the greatest pain you will ever feel in your entire life. Have you ever done that to your parents? Laid out like a Lego minefield for them on hard surfaces. Anyway, but put this down. This is fascinating because the United States Supreme Court reversed itself. Look at that. This is rare. The Lawrence versus Texas case, 2003, reversed the Supreme Court, Drake, on the exact same issue. They're like, whatever, precedent. Who cares about precedent? Now, what is the rule in this country? This is important. Because we were talking about marriage, like the formal legal relationship between adults in a marriage situation, and then all the stuff that happens in marriage. Well, guess what? With the Lawrence versus Texas case, the Supreme Court has basically said all that intimacy that potentially could take place in a marriage, you have a right to do that with any other consenting adult, regardless of your marital situation. Did you hear me? It's like the playing field is completely free. So, yeah, it's completely removed. So, in other words, look at these guys right here. Are they breaking? Well, no. I think officially under the laws of whatever state they're living in now, he's only married to one woman. But what kind of relationship does he have with the other woman? Like they're married. Do you understand that? And is that legal? Can a state prohibit that kind of behavior? Nope, not according to Lawrence versus Texas. Okay? So the horse has already left the barn when it comes to marital intimacy, regardless of whether you get the legal document there. So these guys right here, how many can he right now be married to? One. How many is he in a intimate relationship probably with? Two. And of course, here's the deal. I don't know, you could rearrange everything there. I don't know. I mean, it's their choice and so forth. I don't know. I'm not going to, I don't know. Really, Caden? What do I mean rearrange everything? Okay. How many, here's the deal, Caden. What if they're like, okay, the three of us are going to go get married, but they're like, only two of us can get married. And so he's like, well, which of you two am I going to get married to? And then the two of them look at each other and go, we're not marrying you, we're going to marry each other. Is that legal? It's legal. Do you understand that? The ladies can marry each other. Anyway, whatever. I'm not even gonna like follow that and comment and so forth. So, oh my gosh, no, we haven't got to the next one yet. So, do you understand the kind of conundrum we're in here? Okay. Now, let me just throw this out first. The government protect the community. Throw this out. Let's see if there is. Can you think of any argument for the support of the current anti-polygamy laws that exist throughout all of the different 50 states? Go for it. No, we need an argument as to why. Now, here's the deal. This is where it gets a little bit difficult. And so it's kind of like, let's first identify what are the arguments. I can come up with one. I'll start you all off. No, we're not going to get into that. That's the next category. Sorry. beware, down this path lies interesting. Yes. Okay, so here we go. Here's one. Shh. And King Solomon might be able to relate to this. Who are you talking about? He had legally a whole bunch of wives, and they argued with each other. So remember that little clip there where the one gal was talking, not these guys, but these guys? Let me take the picture up because I can refer this to you. Right here. This is the last one to join in marriage to the fellow right here. Okay? And the other three agreed that it was okay for him to start dating her. And it was really weird because the producers, they're reality TV producers and so forth, what they did is they followed him and her around on their date. And the other ladies are like, they weren't there, so they didn't really want to know. However, the producers showed them the videotape. And how did they feel? Why didn't they feel good? Oh, because he was a married man, and he wasn't married to her at the time. And so, just in that brief thing, it was sort of like, she was feeling bad, and she was crying because the other ones were like, judging her, about, at least the situation that was taking place there. It's like, what's that?
They literally said it was okay if you could start dating her.
Oh, but not kissing her.
People lie.
Well, but that's just common sense. When you date someone, you're eventually.
Well, some people don't kiss on the first or second or third date. Some people wait until, the rings. Okay? Victoria. Shh. What? I love that one. Yeah, the tax issue. I've heard that one over the years and so forth, and it can get very, very complicated. Is the complexity and so forth involved in it like, oh my gosh, taxes, tax. It's kind of like, could you have multiple businesses? I mean, the tax complications, you're going to need a tax attorney and so forth, but I have seen that. Good for you raising that. And then, of course, there's just this sort of interrelationship issues. I mean, it's kind of like, if you look at people over history that have in their society multiple marriages and so forth, sometimes where you've got emperors that have multiple wives, sometimes they're just like, oh my gosh, I just don't want to be in the room when they're all maneuvering and fighting and so forth with each other. A lot of drama. Or Nepal, where women sometimes are married to two men. And typically the men are not there at the same time because they're leading expeditions, I want to say. One's in town and then the other's gone and so forth. Yeah, because they're on the job away from the household. So anyway, because you're thinking, I thought it just applies in this situation. Here than there.
An argument against it is how would the divorcing work?
Well, you're either married. Here's the deal. This is actually, I can answer this fairly simple. You're married and then you're divorced. Although you're talking about, how about this one? So if he's married to 4, let's say they're legally married, if he's married to 4, then his income that he's earning under the law is sort of shared with all 4, but if he gets divorced to 1, then that's kind of complicated, isn't it, to split it out? I don't know. Well, it's interesting question. It's kind of complicated. I mean, you could really make this up, because here, instead of him shoo with 4 wives, and I've seen this has already happened. You have a multiple group of 3 or 4, and they all want to be married to each other. Okay, so then you get all the whole crisscross thing. And yeah, the whole divorce and taxes and everything package. It gets complicated. Yes?
So, what about child custody?
Actually, that one might be a little easier, because in order to, maybe, okay, because how many does it take to make a child? 2. You need one of these, and you want to know these. So that might just be between 2 with. Oh my gosh! And yeah, adoption. Will the courts allow? Will the courts allow somebody to adopt somebody to multiple parents? Because right now, I think the maximum number for an adoption is 2. So, complicated, is that enough? Is that enough? It's just like, it's too complex. So what are you going to say? Are you going to tell the Supreme Court it's too complex? It should get in the way of their individual right to do whatever they want. What are you going to do? Are you feeling a little bit of tension here? Oh, you're going to be in just a moment. And then we're going to move on to the next one. Okay. Yeah, actually, here's the deal. Notice with these kinds of things, if you sort of like, if you stick to individual choice, ding, 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 you're like, I'm consistent. I'm consistent. And maybe you say the Supreme Court should like stick to that consistent argument, but watch where that path is going to go. And are you comfortable with that, especially if the groundwork has not been laid for public acceptance of those kinds of relationships? Is there an effort to make polygamous relationships acceptable? All right, well, let's see how many of you guys go along with this one. All right, let's go to the first question here. Who should decide this? I'll go with elected leaders. Raise your hand if you believe that this should still be left up to the politicians reflecting the majoritarian point of view. Okay, let's go ahead and win. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, now I need a volunteer among those 15. Could you tell me why you're okay with the politicians making the decision here, but not over here? Go for it.
I think it's just sort of words with same-sex marriage, where just to sort of like get the ball rolling as far as making a big decision in the Supreme Court, it should start in the states. That's really my thought process.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in as to why not let the Supreme Court? Are you afraid what the Supreme Court might do? Are you afraid they're going to legalize polygamy in all 50 states? It's the Constitution, dude. Yeah. Of course it's... Go ahead, Victoria. Shh.
Looking at the other two, for race and it's not as much of a pressing issue as the other.
That's what I said.
It's 100%. I mean, it's a very...
Oh, you're going to tell these people that it's not a pressing issue. They want to be married.
They were my sister.
Oh my gosh! We haven't gotten to that issue yet. Oh my gosh! You're like...
Anyone
Shh.
got enough to marry?
Shh. Hey.
It's such a small group of people who are participating in this thing.
Oh, so Victoria, it's okay if a small group of people want to assert potentially their constitutional rights. It's just their constitutional rights, but if it's a small group of people with constitutional rights, do they matter as much?
It's just not as big of a pressing issue. If later down the line, if it's like a huge group of people who want this, then it's like, okay,
So is that how constitutional rights work? If you have enough people on your side, then your constitutional rights will be honored.
those rights to be granted, it's not kind of,
In the 9th Amendment, it's still all right.
Oh, no, we're past the 9th Amendment. Now we're into 14th Amendment analysis. Equal protection. And we have two very big Supreme Court cases. Loving. Okay, in fact, we'll go ahead and write the decisions on here so that you can see it. All right, we got the Loving decision. Okay, and then we've got Obergefell. Okay, all right. Anybody else with an argument as to why you shouldn't be consistent? All right, let's hear from those of you guys who are like, let the Supreme Court decide. Okay, 1, 2. Think which way did you have? Neutral. You're on the United States Supreme Court. You can't be neutral on these kinds of things. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? In other words, all right, why should the Supreme Court take this issue?
Okay, because like, okay, what?
It's okay. You can stand up. Shh. You can stand up. Whatever you choose. It's your choice. Individual choice. Stand or sit.
What makes this so different from race and orientation? What makes it so different?
Okay? That question has been posed. Raise your hand if you would like to answer that question. We haven't even gotten to the vote of how this is going to turn out. Okay, we'll go ahead and take one right here. Shh.
What do you mean, what's the difference?
No, I mean,
It's
like,
comparing its value.
and how much, in its value and how much it matters. What makes it different? Like,
Okay, shh.
what makes it not matter?
Go ahead, let her answer. MK's going to answer.
Discrimination is a very different issue than discrimination on the basis of having multiple partners.
What about origination?
And orientation.
Why?
How is it different? I think is what he's asking. Shh, shh, shh. Let her answer. Shh.
It's different. They've experienced this for a really long time. Like, dating back to the history of when this country was founded.
So bad.
It's not, it just hasn't been quite as much of a pressing issue. It's not a precedent in discrimination, see?
They went to prison. Okay.
They were sent to prison because
Okay.
but nowadays,
Let MK finish.
it's a little bit more accepted as far as having multiple partners.
Okay, Caden, you want to add to, you want to pick up the argument from there?
Race and sexual orientation, I think you cannot control, while polygamy, wanting to marry multiple people is something you can.
How many friends do you have?
I have one.
All right, maybe that wasn't the right ask. Can you have, I mean, if you look at religious traditions and so forth, sometimes some religions at different times and so forth, Islam, for example, within the Quran and so forth, they're like, you may have 4 wives and so forth. So is it too much? Should the government step in and say, one is enough? With respect to wives. When the government doesn't, here's the deal. Has the government stepped in and say to an unmarried person or even a married person, shh, you may not have intimate relations with just but one person? No, I mean, Lawrence versus Texas says that again, the horse has already left the barn. If a person is married to one other and has affairs with 5 or 6 others, that's going to be definitely a problem in that marriage. But can they be punished in the courts of that state? No.
Okay, so.
Back to you, Owen.
Okay, so. I'm still curious.
Oop.
Yes, I am. Okay, so. So, going for the estates, I believe inherently seems to sort of dampen and at least at least from what I've seen, seem against it. I'm not assuming that, but it seems that. So I'm curious, why should this not be enacted if there's an opportunity for it? Like, is there anything inherently wrong with this? Because I don't believe so.
Taxes, complexity, and so forth. All right, should we get a vote on this issue now? Because I want to take you into the next ones. We're going down the rabbit hole. All right, here we go. Shh. Raise your hand if you believe, ultimately, and it could be, regardless of who decides this, ultimately, that this is a matter left up entirely to individual choice. Let the individuals choose to the number of marriages that they do. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is interesting. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Whoa. Okay. How many of you guys are like, no. Just say 1. You only get 1 at a time. Okay? So how many of you guys, raise your hands, support the anti-polygamy laws as exist in the states around the country? 1. Wow, Drake. Sorry, go ahead. Some other people are on the sideline, I can see on this one. We got some non-voters. Raise your hand if you didn't vote. Go ahead. All right, you're like, why didn't you vote? Shh. I don't care. You have a voice. Go ahead. Okay. Well, if you don't care, then why don't you just sort of go, fine, we'll go this way, or fine, we'll go that way. Drake, you took a position. All right. Enough of these sort of namby-pamby in the middle of the road and so forth. It's okay. Why did you say, no, well, let's keep it the way it is?
So I'm thinking if you let it let them have their marriages and stuff, then it invites more grief.
More grief? More groups? Oh, okay. So what you're saying here is, I see. No, I understand this. Shh. You're saying, let's hold the line somewhere. And some people over here held the line at like, we do not want the Supreme Court to be ruling on it. Although, interestingly enough, when it came down to actually voting on it, most people are still consistent on here, although some of you guys are starting to get a little bit uncomfortable going, I don't know, I don't like where this is heading. Drake's already like, I see where this is heading. Are you ready for the next issue? Consanguinity. Write that word down. Ooh, it's a lovely word. Consanguinity. Consanguinity. States have laws with respect to consanguinity and marriage. Basically, what it has to do with is blood relationships. Oh! Did you? Yeah, consanguinity, right here. Did you? Okay. Shh. Another word for that is incest. Okay? All right? Which some people understand a little bit better. Although, here's the deal. Incest is something that actually takes place within people who are closely related to each other. Consanguinity is just simply the marriage. All right, so here's the deal. Write this down. Most states, it kind of varies. It's sort of like cousin versus second cousin. Okay? Shh. Write this down. Hey! Hey! Most states have laws that limit your ability to marry somebody relative to how close you are in a relationship. So some states allow cousins to get married, first cousins. Others don't. Okay? That's usually kind of like the thing there. Siblings? No. Parent-child? No. Uncle, nephew, uncle, niece? No. Grandparent, grandchildren? No. Okay? No. What is this? In Egypt, they tried to keep it together in the royal family. So, like, for example, Cleopatra was betrothed by arrangement to her, I think, younger brother. And then she ditched him and hung out with Julius Caesar for a while. And then she ended up with Mark Antony. Good grief. My gosh. And then she got asped. Okay? She was just about to be conquered by Octavian, by his Roman armies. And she's like, I think I'm going to die by snake bite. So she did. Anyway, so it was considered important within that. Now notice this, okay, because I can see this right. Raise your hand, go ahead, give the obvious reason. What is a community reason to prevent marriages of people too closely related to each other? Let's see if I can call on some. Ivan, I haven't called on you yet. There we go. Okay. So, I mean, this is an obvious one, okay? And you can understand this because if you look at societies that have practice of having people married too closely related to one another, you do see a higher incidence of what would otherwise be preventable hereditary defects and issues like that. But here's the problem. Are there any laws that exist right now preventing the essence of that relationship? In other words, the Lego parts, okay, from taking place among consenting adult close relations. Lawrence versus Texas. What does the United States Supreme Court say about the right of individuals to have consensual, intimate relations with anybody who is consenting? They say it's your choice. So it's an interesting argument because what you could say is we're trying to prevent, right, just sort of like, I don't know, bad stuff. That's my word for bad stuff because I don't have a lot more room to basically come into that. That could come out of a marriage, but here's the problem. It can already come out of a relationship between those two people regardless of if they're married. And the Supreme Court has already said, it's not any of the government's business to butt into those consensual adult relationships. That's a big ruling, that Lawrence versus Texas ruling is. It's huge because it basically, therefore, potentially undercuts all of the or at least this prevention, this one that says you can't get married to your kid, your brother, your sister. And you're like, oh, but I'm sure Hollywood or none of the news media or any of those people are trying to make it like it's normal. Oh my gosh, I was actually surprised, not surprised. Call the Midwife. Have you guys ever watched that? It's a pretty cool show. It's set like in the time period in London right after World War II. And you got these young women who are, they're nurses, they're maternity nurses, and they go around in the poor East End of London and help women with childbirth issues and so forth. Okay? And so there's all kinds of interesting characters and so forth. But there was this one involving Peggy and Frank, and they were presented in a very, very positive manner. I want to say like he died or she died. I think it was he died. And they were kind of poor, and they were brother-sister. Oh, there you go. They were brother-sister. And it wasn't discovered, and they were I think they were both orphaned, and they were living in very, very difficult circumstances from early on. They only had each other, according to the storyline, they only had each other to lean to and rely on. And then when the people, I think the nuns who run the midwifery service, when the nuns discovered that these two had actually been living together in the same room for years and years and years, and then figured out that they'd probably, in all respects, been intimate with one another for years and years and years, what did they do in that TV show? Were they condemned as oh, this is a terrible, awful sort of a thing that they did? Or was it a more empathetic, sympathetic portrayal of incest? What do you think? Probably the latter. It was the latter. Okay? It was the latter. And so it's interesting because you could look at that and go, wow. I mean, and you guys, as you guys continue on in your lives, this is where the discussions and debates and social presentation of various different things, that's where it's headed. So are there any laws in any state that allow for sisters and brothers to get married? No. How many of you want to leave it up to elected officials? Raise your hand if you want to leave it up to elected officials. How many of you guys are going to be like, oh, let's continue on through this path and say you have a right? Should we get straight to the vote?
Well, hold on. Just because we said that we want the Supreme Court to decide, does that mean that we want them to?
No, and actually this is where it really came down to it. Because this is actually, I would have thought here that most of you, since you said leave it up to the elected officials to do that, as opposed to letting the court do it, I figured, oh my gosh, you're going to hold the line here. But you didn't. Okay? There was only one of you that said, hold the line. And then others are like, where's the line? So are you going to hold the line here? Or not? Yes? Do you guys want to discuss it at all before you vote? Are you okay kind of what do you understand what the circumstances are here? You ready to vote?
Yeah.
How many of you then, all right, here's the vote. Raise your hand if you say, this is entirely up to Frank and Peggy and anyone else who is in those particular situations to make that decision with respect to what they're going to do. Nobody? Wow. How many of you guys are saying, no, we need to continue having consanguinity laws that do not allow for people who are closely related to get married to each other? Okay. Looks like this is yeah, I don't know, I'll put a check mark here. It's not infinite. Check. And yet you do understand the difficulty here because can they legally have those relationships? I mean, does that even happen? Let's go to the next slide. Some of you guys are like, oh no. Here we have Mia Farrow, an actress. Woody Allen, an actor and film director. They married, okay? It was not her first marriage. She had a marriage previous with Andre Previn, I think it was. And they had adopted Sunyi Previn. So that's why she's got the last name of her adopted father. So she was adopted. And there's Mia Farrow. And there's a number of other kids and so forth in the household. Oh, you know this one. Do you see where this is going? What happens? A relationship forms within that household. Needless to say, Mira Farrow's not really happy with how that relationship developed, but ultimately, when they're both adults, they get married. Woody Allen is never the adopted parent of Soon-Yi Previn, so therefore doesn't run afoul of consanguinity issues. Obviously, it's like, is there a lot of drama going on in that household? I would say no. There's been some like interviews and counter interviews. Have you watched that? I think it's on HBO. Like anyway. So they're married. Yeah, I mean it's got like bubbling and bubbling and bubbling and bubbling and bubbling. Okay? But you guys have drawn the line, right? Did you draw the line? Where's the line? What's okay? Where's the line? Is it okay for siblings to get married? You can't see it? What line? You don't see a line? Can we finally draw a line? How about here? Can we draw a reasonable line with respect to age? Yes, we can. That's the line. That's the line. All right. Put your hand up if you want to offer forth a reasonable age-related line above which you can get married, below which you can't. Go for it, Anna. How old is someone when they finally are mature enough to make an important decision about marriage? 12? 13? Is that old enough? 14? Am I going in the right direction at least? 15? Is a 16-year-old old enough to make a very important decision about marriage? 17? 17? 18? That's kind of a whole marriage back. How many of you guys are like, yeah, when I turn 18, I'm going to get married? Find somebody. There we go. Okay, Ivan. Okay, send out the wedding invitations. You got 2 more years. Huh? Okay. How many of you guys are okay with 18? Okay. What about 16 if your parents sign on to it? Because that's, I think, what the law is in Idaho. 16 to 17 when your parents sign on to it. Is this legal where it took place? This is legal. This, I want to say, I picked up the picture. I believe this is in Afghanistan. Okay, an arranged marriage. And this is actually a problem because you get these child brides who are in arranged marriages with men who are much, much older. And there's not a lot of really cool things going on there. Needless to say, the rights of women in Afghanistan aren't really the highest, and probably they're going to continue going down lower, especially after the United States removes its troops after 9/11 this year. And so women, anyway, so you'll have some women, girls really, I guess you can call it. When is a girl a woman? 18. Well, she is a wife in this situation. Could they move to this country and have that marriage be recognized and so forth? I don't think so. Okay. Now, here's an interesting thing. Individual choice. Does he have a choice? Does she have much of a choice? What if you're 12 years old, can you make, or do you have enough wherewithal to make a choice about something as important as that? I don't think so. I think that would be really hard. So I think some of you got the line here, some of you got it here. If you have any doubt, then probably age. Leave them alone. Leave the kids alone. You know who else needs to be left alone? Want to see the last category? Yes?
Just for my sake, can I change my vote on polygamy and put it into the protect community section?
Sure.
Just put a 2 in there.
A 2.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, there we go. So we're going to be protecting the community, all right? Oh, sorry, I had one more slide here. This was common practice in ancient Greece. It was common practice. It was culturally practiced, culturally accepted. In this particular situation, what are the genders of the people involved here? Well, yeah, the older guy is a man. He's got a beard. And they would actually, that was part of the cultural thing, that they would bring young boys into an intimate relationship and so forth as part of their upbringing process. Max is like, what? If you look in history and you look close at various different cultural practices, You may be surprised, okay? And actually, if you know other parts, you're like, oh, well, that's really difficult for the boys. I don't have slides for what happens to all the girls around the world as far as the various different practices to them. There are places in Africa that perform all kinds of surgeries to remove various parts of female anatomy because they're like, yeah, you don't need that. And it's not consensual. It is cultural, and it occurs and so forth. In this country, it's not legal to do that. Yeah. Although if you go back far enough in this country's history, if you had somebody potentially who was had a developmental disability and so forth, good transition to where we're headed, and the parents are like, you sterilize them. Wow, you're going to take away their complete reproductive ability? Used to be able to do that in this country.
But my aunt wants that to come back.
Your aunt wants that to come back? Or even worse, and this won't surprise you, were those sorts of things actually carried out on people of a not preferred race in this country? Here we go, the last category. Aww.
No, go marry. I guess marrying them is fine.
Did she consent? Woo! How about this one? Woo! Is that consent or is that not consent? Woo! A Roman emperor supposedly wanted to, I forget if he wanted to marry his horse or if he wanted to appoint his horse as the general in charge of the Roman army. I forget, but that's just crazy. Yes, go ahead, Caden.
Is marrying an inanimate object legal?
Well, here's the deal. Animals do have some rights. I don't know about inanimate objects, although, trust me, you guys, I know this is going to happen. As IA becomes more sophisticated, it's already in the science fiction. As IA becomes more sophisticated, are there going to be rights for intelligent, artificial intelligence?
I don't think so.
They're probably locked right now.
Is your vacuum, oh, my vacuum cleaner has got no rights. If I tell it to work, I hope it works. You know, it's like I turn the switch and I hope it works. You know?
You know the guy from Toy Story, the first one, who created all the weird things?
Sid, yeah.
That's how it should be.
He's twisted. Yeah, we're watching, yeah. All right, so do you feel a little bit better appraised as far as where things were, where things are, and maybe where things are going? All right, here is one. As an issue, it's very interesting, as an issue, this is hot. Politically, legally, right now. You can write this down, okay? 14th Amendment, equal protection, okay? This has to do with athletics, and it has to do with transsexual surgery and qualification for various different competition, okay? Yeah, some of you guys have run into this issue before. And actually, Idaho was one of the first states to bring up the issue. Hold on. And a number of other states, obviously not all, because there's a wide variety of opinion on this one. Let me give you the facts, and then we'll open it up to discussion as to what you think and how this should come in. Again, the first time I dealt with this one was last year, and the students had a variety of opinions, and they were respectful to each other, as I would expect you guys to be as well. Here are the facts, okay? People. Generally, okay, got that. Generally, there's not much argument as far as the equipment. Sexual equipment that is arranged to males, females. Okay, got that? Now there is a very small group of people and so forth that sometimes you get it mixed up. Ask biology teachers and so forth that's smaller. But the bigger issue is this, okay? If a person who is born as a female wants to change over to a male or vice versa, they can do that obviously with a transsexual surgery. This isn't just like identifying as. This is like a surgical procedure and so forth involved. You got that? And depending on which particular time that takes place in that person's life, they may have already developed, particularly for the male, a certain amount of muscle mass, for example. Do you understand that? Okay? So, and then also after the surgeries, typically then those doctors who are working with those patients will give them various different hormone treatments to make things more one sex versus the other. Does that make sense to you? Okay. It's like, I'm not a doctor. I'm just, trying to explain this thing. So where this came up was a concern on the part